guys, today I'm going to be talking to you about my favorite books of all time and convincing you to read them because I love them so much. These are like my favorite books of the past 3 years of reading. I only have 6. They're all right here. This one's super annotated, but basically I'm just going to be talking about them and telling you why I love them and why I think about them all the time. The first book, a lot of these are really short, and all 6 of these have movie adaptations, and I think a book having a movie adaptation or like a TV show adaptation or anything makes me like it more because I can think back on the book and think about the scenes from the movie, and I think that that's what happened with all these books, is that the book was really good, so then I went and watched the movie and the movie was really good. So now it's just like stuck in my brain as a story and I can just like see it, and I think that's why I love all these. But the first one is 1922 by Stephen King. I love this book so much. This was like the first book that I read by myself, like just reading for fun. And it's super short. It's like barely 130 pages. And I just love the story. It was like really sad, but it was also, I think all of the characters were like really fleshed out in this book, which was crazy to me because it's so short. But the movie for this book is so good too. It's basically about, it's set in 1922, obviously. And it's basically about a guy who's married, he has a son, and his wife like inherits a bunch of land, and it's like really far away in the city. Or it's not in the city, it's like next to their farm, like this farm, and she wants to sell it and move to the city. So the dad obviously doesn't want to do that, and a lot of stuff happens, and it's crazy, and I loved it. And there's a rat on the cover. Every time I think about a rat, which is not that often, but if I see a rat, I think about this book. I think about like the year, this book stuck with me so much, and it's so short, and I read this like 3 years ago, and I still think about the characters in this book. I still think about the Sweetheart Bandits from this book. Just so sad, and the movie was so good. It was like a perfect adaptation for this book, and I completely recommend it if you want like a really short story that's fun, that you'll probably think about. It's kind of sad. I would recommend this book. Okay, my next one is by the same author. It's The Body by Stephen King. I read this like 3 years ago too, I think, and I still think about it, and I think this is the book that inspired the movie Stand By Me, and I love that movie, and I remember reading this book and then finding out that Stand By Me was the movie for this, so I watched that, and I've seen it like 3 times now. I think that it's such a perfect adaptation of this book as well, but I remember when I read this book, it's like almost 200 pages, so it's super short, but I could picture the story in my head so clearly, and I think it's definitely just because of Stephen King's writing is so good that I like knew exactly what was going on every moment. I could see it. I was always thought about the characters, and I also think that this book has a lot of like what he does where it's like a book inside of a book, because the main character Gordy, he wants to be a writer when he grows up, so a lot of his writing is in this book, and I really liked it. Let me see if I can find an example, because I read, let me see, there's a story within this story. The font just gets super tiny, but it just changes a little bit. But I remember when I read Misery by Stephen King, and that book had a book within a book, and I didn't really love that one because the story within the story in that book didn't really relate very much. But in this book, the stories that Gordy writes that we get to read, they really just like show more about his character and like what he's going through. And it's called The Body because Gordy and his friends go to try and find a body of a missing boy. And I think that like the concept for this story is kind of crazy, like a bunch of young kids going to find a body, but I think that this book does it so well because it addresses the fact that it's kind of weird, but it also addresses the fact that like every character in this book is going through something, and it's kind of like finding the body that they're trying to find really just like brought them together, and I thought it was so beautiful and I loved it, and I loved the ending. I loved the last line, and I think the movie that they made on this is so good. And I love that I think the name Stand By Me is really good for the movie, but I think that the book is just so good, and I think you should read it. It's really short. It's about a bunch of kids. It's kind of like adult, I guess, like adult content, like they cuss and stuff, and they're just like, I would recommend this to kids. I would, because I just think it's so good. And okay, this next book, I think that it's a classic. I can't remember right now, but it's The Outsiders. I love this book, and I know that it's like some people love it, some people hate it, I think, but a lot of people like read this in school. I never read this in school, but when I was like buying books for the first time, I had like remembered this book, and I had seen clips from the movie, and I was like, that's interesting, like I want to read that. So I bought it, and I got this like ugly edition. It's like a hardcover, but I hate hardcovers. But I don't like, I read this book. It was super easy to read, super easy to understand, and it was just so good. It was kind of like, hang on, this is the first book that I like ever tabbed anything, because the font in this book is huge. But this was the first book that I ever, like, this book made me cry. I was so sad when I was reading this book, because I went in and I knew nothing about this book or this story or what was going to happen. And I love that I went into it, like, not knowing anything, because I think that just made the whole story better. But yeah, especially towards the end, I like cried. I was so sad. And then I watched the movie, and I think the movie was a really good adaptation of this as well. And I think that the relationships in this book, like between the main guys, is so good, and the writing is so good. And I think S.C. Hinton wrote this when she was like 15, which is just insane, because I could really, like, when I was reading this, I swear I was like, these are real people, like these are real people, this actually happens. Like, and I think that if a book makes you feel like that, like the people are real, then that just shows that it's like the writing is incredible, the story is incredible, and that's exactly how I felt about this. Okay, this next one, we only have 3 left. I feel like this is a very basic favorite to have now, but I love this book, The Virgin Suicides by Jeffrey Eugenides, I think his name is. I read this book like 3 years ago, and I remember I picked it up off my shelf. I bought it because I thought that it was gorgeous, and I just loved like the concept. I read the synopsis and I really liked it, and I had it for a while. I had it for like a couple months, and I had read a really long book, and I was like, I really just want a short book. This is like, I think 220 pages or something. And I was like, I really want a short book. I'm gonna read this. And I read it, and I just loved it. And I think I need to say, because the ending of this book, from what I remember, is not very like wraps everything up. Like, it does, but you still have a lot to think about in the ending. And I loved that, because I binged this book for like a whole day, and I was just like sitting there, and I was thinking about the ending, and I was like, it's kind of like open to interpretation a little bit, but I loved that. And I love that, like, you never really find out the reason why the 5 Lisbon sisters like do what they do. You never really find out. And I watched the movie by Sofia Coppola, and I thought it was so good. I loved the aesthetic of the whole movie and the whole book, and I think the ending of that movie too, it's just kind of like open for interpretation. Like, people can think different things about it, but I think, first of all, the writing was really good. It was really beautiful. There was a lot of like metaphors, which I really liked, and I know a lot of people don't like. I forced my sister to read this, and she hated it. But I think it really just depends. Like, if you like lyrical writing, if you like metaphors in your writing, you'll really like this. If you like a book that you kind of have to think about once you finished it, I think you'll really like this, because I think about this a lot. I read this my freshman year of high school, and now I'm a junior, and I really just, I think about this book all the time, and I think about scenes from the story, and I think about like, because this book and the movie is told from the boy's perspective in this. I believe the book is told from the boy's perspective. And I think it's just really cool that like the story is about the Lisbon sisters, but you don't really get their point of view. And I think if we got a book from the Lisbon sisters' point of view, that would be insane. But basically, let me read the back. Yeah, okay. The back says what I'm going to say, so this is not a spoiler. Basically, the 5 Lisbon sisters, one by one, they die by their own doing, is what I'm going to say. And it's so interesting. It's not like sad. It's not like super sad. And I don't think the movie is really sad. And I don't think this book is that sad either. I just think it's very like, why are they doing this? You know, and no one really knows, I don't think. And I think it's kind of like a mystery. It's kind of like a mystery. You kind of have to think about it, and you kind of just like have to form your own opinion, really. And I really liked that. And I read this book a long time ago, so I don't remember everything, but I really just liked it. And I remember reading it, and it was really easy to read, and I was really captivated by it. Like, I never wanted to like pick up my phone or anything. And I think that that's really good in the book. And I also am able to just like picture scenes from this book, and it's so short, and I just loved it, and I completely recommend it. This next one, this is a classic too. It's The Invisible Man by H.G. Wells, and a lot of my favorites are classics, but I don't read classics that much. I read this book because I watched the kill count on YouTube by Dead Meat. I watched the kill count on this movie, the original one from 1933, I think it was, and I really liked the movie. I thought it was really good, and I had really wanted to watch the movie, like the new Invisible Man horror movie, and I was like, the book's really short. It's like a really famous story. I really want to read it. And I remember with this one, the words are really tiny in this book, but I listened to this on audiobook while I followed along reading this. I just wasn't sure about it because it was written a really long time ago. It was in 1897, so really long time ago. That would be, if the movie was made in 1830, that's like 40 years after, 30 something years after this came out. I might have to fact check that. I'm not 100% sure. But I remember reading this, and I was nervous about like the language in this book, like if I wouldn't understand it fully, because I'm really bad with like reading classics and not understanding everything that they're trying to say. But with this, it took me listening to it for like an hour and a half, 2 hours, and I was kind of like invested in it, and it didn't really bother me. Like, I could picture it. I really liked, if I'm remembering correctly, this is not told in the Invisible Man's perspective, which I really liked, because like the first chapter is called The Strange Man's Arrival. So he like arrives to this inn, and he's all weird, he's all bandaged up, and people are like, what is wrong with this man? He's like making potions and stuff. And I think it was so cool, like if you think about it, because it's not told from the Invisible Man's perspective, and you never really see inside his perspective. But it's interesting because it's like you're finding out the story from what people are seeing, and he's invisible. I just think it's so cool to think about. Like, he's invisible, but we're getting the story from what other people think. I just love that. I love that so much. And I think in this book, it was described on Audible as a grotesque romance, which I didn't really get, but I kind of get it now because he's doing a lot of stuff to like get his fiance back. But I don't think that was like a big point in the movie. I think this book is a lot darker than the movie. Like, the Invisible Man in this book, I think, is a lot more evil than in the movie. And I think in the new like horror movie, I don't think it really relates that much at all. I do think that's a really good movie though. I think both of The Invisible Man, is the one from 1930 something, and the new one, the horror movie one, I think with Elizabeth Banks, I think. Yeah, the girl from Handmaid's Tale. I love both of those movies, and I think that it's an incredible story. I think that it's a classic story, and it's told really well. It's super short, like there's not that much introduction or like filler or anything. It's a really good story. It's really well told, it's really well written, and it's really captivating. I don't read classics that much, but this is my last favorite book. It is Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. I read this, so this book is like, I think it's like 532 pages, and I annotated the crap out of this book, and I made like, I had tabs, and I had this thing to like tell me what the tabs meant. Like, I annotated almost every single page of this because I read it for a school project. And I remember when I was researching this book and I was trying to find out like if the language would be hard to understand or like what the reading level was, and it said that you could read this, like it was recommended to 12-year-olds and up. And I was like, that's interesting, like it's a really long book, I don't know, like I'm just gonna read it. And I read it, and it's just so good. First of all, it's just so good. I love the story, I love all the sisters, and I love the relationship between all the sisters. And okay, what was I saying? My sister just came in here and now I like lost my train of thought. Basically, I think this book is written so well, first of all, and I just think that the sisters, they're all different and they all go through different paths, and I think that it's just beautiful. And I also think that Laurie is the villain in this, because think about how much happier the sisters would be if Laurie never was there. And if I was Florence Pugh's character, Amy, I think it was, I would not marry him after he was like infatuated with Jo his whole life, and then he just goes to another sister. Absolutely not. I hate that. I hate it. And I don't know why on earth she would marry him. I don't know. I'm really at a loss at things why she would do that. But it was also so sad, and I think it's long. It's like a long enough book that there was like different parts of it that I was really sad and I was really happy, and then I was like, oh, that's so sweet. Like, it's like a whirlwind. Like, you go through these girls' life with them pretty much, like from when they're young, they grow up. It's crazy. And I think every chapter, like, there's no filler, there's no like stuff that I would have done differently. And I watched both of the movies for this, the one with Christian Bale and the one with Timothée Chalamet, and I like the old one. I really like the old one. I like the new one too, but I think it shifts the story a little bit, which I think is good. Like, it's fresh for like new audiences and stuff, but I just really like the old one. Like, having read the book, I think that the old one portrayed the story so well, and I loved it, and I loved all the actors in it. But I don't know, if I had to pick, I'd pick the old one, is what I'm trying to say. But I think this book is just so beautiful, and I love where all the girls end up. I really do love it. And I just don't have enough good things to say about this, because I think this book is beautiful. I think that it's long, but I think that it should be long for this kind of story, because it's really just like you're going through these girls' lives, like their lives from when they're young. And there was a chapter in it, and it was like, I wouldn't be a good historian of this family if I didn't. So it was like written by someone observing the family, which I liked. But yeah, I just really liked it, and I like all the stuff surrounding this book. I really just love the movies, and let me find that. Let me grab this. Since I read this for a school project and I had to annotate it, I've made like this big thing of notes on each and every chapter as to like what happened, like the plot points of, you can't even see, like the plot points of each chapter. And I don't know, I think just reading this book and annotating it heavily, it really just like immersed me in the story a little bit. And I watched both movies in one day right after I finished this, and I think that really like I think about this book and I think about scenes from the movie, and I think that it's just like cemented in my brain as a story that like I'll never forget, really. And I just love all these characters, and I love all their stories and where they end up. And oh, it was so easy to read, and it was so fun, and it was really easy to comprehend. And I recommend this to any girl ever, anyone ever should read this book. I think it's beautiful and I love it. Okay, those are my 6 favorite books. I hope that I convinced you to read them today, because I really think that everyone should. I think everyone should read these, or like try to read them. I just think they're so good and I love them so much, and I hope someone reads them so I can talk about them. Okay, bye. I'm gonna go read now.